Welcome to the Living in Alignment podcast. My name is Amy Landry. Through a collage of conversations, here we distill mindful living and timeless wisdom within a modern, everyday context. Thank you for being here. Indu Arora is a yoga and Ayurveda teacher, mentor, and author based out of the USA. She considers herself a student for a lifetime. Indu has been sharing about yoga philosophy, yoga therapy, and Ayurveda for the last 2 decades. Her unique gift is making yoga and Ayurveda a practice, which is equally useful for a beginner as for a sincere seeker who has made yoga a lifelong journey. She is inspired by and taught under Kriya Yoga, Himalayan Yoga, Kashmir Shiavism, and Sivananda Yoga lineages. She has studied in a traditional guru-shishya parampara setting. Her teaching style is rooted in empowering and inspiring students to awaken the inner guru. Her core philosophy is yoga is a work in and not a workout. She is the author of 3 books, Mudra, The Sacred Secret, Yoga, Ancient Heritage, Tomorrow's Vision, and SOMA, 100 Heritage Recipes for Self-Care. Indu, welcome. It is such a pleasure to be speaking with you again. Thank you for joining me for the podcast.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Amy.
It's an honor. And I'd love to delve straight into our topic of conversation today, which in some sense might seem like a simple subject and in some sense quite a beautiful, rich, complex, layered topic. So let us together, can we demystify Japa? I'd love to know through your experience and your knowledge, what is Japa? What is it not? Maybe some of the Sanskrit meaning, the various types of Japa. So would you illuminate this practice and this teaching for us?
I think it's a beautiful subject that you have chosen, Amy. I think it's so important to highlight that subject for yoga practitioners, because sometimes yoga just gets muddled up and almost like hyper-focused on asanas, that we do not realize the importance of the subtle and how subtle is primarily the kind of yoga that is spoken about. So when we talk about subtle, we talk about mind, we talk about prana, we talk about consciousness. And that is where the subject japa also comes. The word japa simply means the constant remembrance or repetition. It's important. Either the remembrance is equally okay. Remembrance or repetition of a sound or a mantra over and over and over again for the sake of either shanti, peace, for the sake of pushti, nourishment of the body, nourishment of the mind, nourishment of the prana, chikitsa, which means for therapy. Also, sometimes it is suggested to do japa based on your astrology chart, based on your jyotisha. So that is also a kind of chikitsa, planetary chikitsa. And then there is that ultimate goal, moksha, that by that repetition, we can free ourselves from the repetitive cycles of birth and death. We can empty the baggage of karma. That is japa. And yes, you brought out that really important aspect of japa, that there are types of japa. There is all this variety. There is all these different ways in which a practitioner can access subtle layers of their own mind. One simplest of the ways is by writing, which is called likhita japa. When you write a word, a nama, which means the name of a god or goddess, devi or devata, or a mantra, which could be related to a god or goddess, or could be nirguna, without quality, like soham or om, over and over and over again, which really allows the full engagement of not just the mind and the breath, but also of the body, because you're writing. The other way to do the japa is when you chant it aloud, when you recite it aloud, which is called vachaka japa, which means there is vak, there is sound, the element of sound, the element of verbal expression that is involved, which really allows the involvement of the vocal apparatus. So again, it's a level of engagement, but it pulls back on the engagement of the motor organs. So you're not writing it, you're just reciting it. Then the third level of japa is called upamshu japa, where in upamshu japa, the volume is reduced and you're not moving, the sound is kind of subdued. So there is that repetition of the mantra that goes on with the movement of lip and tongue, but it's almost like whispering. Only you can hear the voice. So again, you are it's slowly like going into pratyahara. Now you are not just reducing the engagement of motor organs, you're slowly reducing the engagement of sensory organs too. So you need a little bit more focus and concentration. Then the another layer of japa is manasik japa, where you see the word manas means mind. You're completely now taking away sensory engagement. There is no movement of lip and tongue. So you're completely bypassing the oral apparatus. So this requires a little bit more concentration, focus, presence of mind. Here, there is no external or whispering sound. It is just mental repetition. And then over a period of time, when we do these practices in any combination or choosing one particular path of yoga or type of japa, it leads to the ultimate variety of japa or type of japa, which is called ajapa japa, where japa means repetition, conscious repetition or conscious remembrance, and ajapa means non-doing of that. So ajapa japa is a consequence of this over a period of time, when it's almost as if your mind now already has the tracks. It already has those impressions. So the mantra automatically arises. So the mantra does your mind instead of you doing the mantra. It arises from within. That is the ultimate goal of the japa, for the mind to become that. But the purpose is either bringing calmness to the mind, clarity to the mind, to bring guidance to the mind, to bring a sense of protection, to work for the resolution of the karmas. So these are some of the purposes around why one should or one could adopt japa as a practice.
It's very much like the pathway inward, very much like we see Patanjali's 8 limbs, for example, the external to the internal, which I love. So is there anything else you would like to share on japa specifically? Because I think that often people associate, when they hear japa, they just think of it as recitation of mantra on mala. So I love that you've clarified it's that, but it is also so much more.
Absolutely. I mean, as I mentioned, that there could be these external tools, like you're writing in a notebook, or I don't know if typing on a device would count. I don't know about that. But I think there is a value in, your hands following that motion, how those words of the mantras, those letters, those aksharas are written. I think there is a value to that. But that would be a question to ponder upon. Can you type? I don't know. Can you copy paste then? I don't know. We can have all kinds of questions there. But there are these external props, whether it is with writing or it is with using a japamala, which my teacher used to say that all props ultimately are dropped in yoga. All the external practices become internal processes. That is the real yoga. And yes, in whether it is the external recitation, audible repetition, or the whispering repetition, or the mental repetition, these are the 3 which can be done using a japamala. A japa is simply a consequence. You're not doing anything, you're allowing. But in these 3, sometimes either a counter, literally a counter where you just count how many times you're reciting. Initially, when I started doing the practice, I was using matchsticks. I used to have these 11 matchsticks, and I used to put one matchstick on the other side. So with that, what am I trying to say is that one aspect of Japmala is that it is a counter. You're using it for counting how many times you're reciting. So that's an integral, an important part of Japa sometimes. How many times do you recite? And then because how many times you recite is important, there comes the Japamala, which generally in Indian tradition, in the Vedic mantras, it is a mala which is made up of either some kind of wood, whether it is the tulsi wood, whether it is the red sandalwood, whether it is seeds, for example, lotus seed or tulsi seed or rudraksha seed. Sometimes semi-precious stones are used, crystals, and so on and so forth. Different kind of beads, different kind of stones, beads made up of woods or seeds or stones are used to count. And there also we can have a symbology. For example, Rudraksha is related to Shiva. Red sandalwood generally is related to Shakti. Clear chords is generally related to Nirguna mantras, or it could be related to any mantra where you are seeking guidance to the mind. Just like the clarity of the crystal, it symbolized that shining skull, the clarity of the mind. So different beads, material of the beads are chosen based on the kind of mantra that you have. And generally a Japmala has 108 beads. Along with the 109th bead, which is called the Guru bead or the Sumeru, which holds everything together. But that does not mean a Japamala is mandatory. Sometimes it is used because it is a great catalyst based on the nature of the bead, the material of the bead. It could be a really good combination with the energy of the mantra. Sometimes it could be really good because it helps you really maintain a count. And sometimes it helps the mind stay present because you're holding on to the bead. There is actually a physical motion. Sometimes when there is that lack of physical motion, the mantras create the repetition of the mantra, the same phrase or same mantra or same sound over and over creates this relaxation effect on the nervous system. And as a result of that, sometimes one feels drowsy and one can lose the awareness. Oh, what was I reciting? How many times have I recited? We can lose the count if you're just keeping the count in the head. So that physical motion really helps in staying present. So there are so many different aspects. I guess I will see what are you curious about for your listeners so we can open up that.
No, that's wonderful. So I would love to chat with you about more about, let's say, mala etiquette. But before we go into that depth, speaking of mantra, if we can delve a little bit into mantra, I know many of the listeners in this community, they have a grasp on a lot of the deeper concepts of yoga, but let's just clarify mantra. Like, what is a mantra? What is the value of the Sanskrit mantra? And what mantra do we choose? How to choose, or who should choose when it comes to the practice of japa specifically?
Yeah, that is important. And why I say that is the word mantra is a Sanskrit word. So it would be in some ways redundant to call it Sanskrit mantra. The word mantra itself is Sanskrit, so mantras are in Sanskrit. The word mantra is made up of these two parts, manaha and tra, where mana or manas means mind, and tra from triyate means to protect. That by the mananat triyate iti mantra. Mananat means by contemplation, by thinking, by remembrance, by repetition of which the mind regains its calm, focus, clarity, freedom, protection. That is a mantra. Now, what is interesting about mantras in current times is sometimes they're equated with the success formulas or even some kind of affirmation. It's something that we can come up with, something that I can just bring up a couple of words together based on what is my intention, and I can weave my mantra. What is your success mantra? What is your mantra? It's just such a casual word that we throw in a word salad, sometimes, and just say things. But really, mantra is a sacred word that comes from the Indian tradition. And those words which come under what is called a mantra are not human created. This is a signifier, a really something that separates mantra from everything else. I'm not saying sankalpa doesn't work, or affirmation doesn't work, or intentions doesn't work, or prayers don't work. All these things work. But what is distinct about mantra is it is not created. It is not human created. There are mantra drishtas, which means mantra seers, who are called rishis and rishikas, who in their transcendental state of mind, which means when someone is beyond their state of mind, above their state of mind, surpassing the impressions of the state of mind, connect to this cosmic intelligence, they become the seers of the mantra. For example, there are certain rishis associated with Gayatri mantra, with Mahamrityunjaya mantra, and so on and so forth. So I think what is really important to understand is mantras are not created by you, people like you or me, or human beings. Mantras are given, are revealed in the sacred texts, whether it is Vedic text, Upanishadic text, yogic texts, tantric texts, and they are not human created. And because they are not human created, they are in the Sanskrit language, we are not so much hyper focused or focused on their meaning, that this word has this meaning. It is the mantras at its subtlest level is basically a sound, and a sound is a vibration. And that vibration is a vibration that is a pathway to that state which is called consciousness. So when we talk about mantra, they are basically a pathway of vibration leading to that state of consciousness. So it is not so much about mantra, this word, this meaning. Yes, we can understand it. In fact, there is a value in understanding what is the meaning of this mantra. Where did it come from? What's the story behind it? What's the depth of it? But if a person is the practitioner of a mantra, what is more important is to connect to its feeling, to connect to the sentiment, to connect to the idea. Why am I reciting the mantra? Because the mantra has this potency to open up for, once again, what I shared in the beginning, for shanti, for peace, for chikitsa, for therapy, for pushti, for nourishment, for moksha, for transcending the cycles of birth and death. So there is this potency in the mantras that it can lead us to all of this. Why are you reciting the mantra? This is important. So this is, and there are various types of mantras. For example, the single syllabled mantras, which are called bija mantras, the seed sounds. For example, Om or Hreem or Cream or Shreem or Hum, Lam, Vam, Ram, Yam, Hum, and so on. And there are these multi-syllabled mantras. For example, Gayatri mantra is a 24-syllabled mantra. So there is Shodash Akshari mantra, 16-syllabled mantra. So there are mantras which follow a certain meter, and the meter is based on how many letters form that particular mantra. And all these details become important when we want to do the japa of the mantra.
Mm-hmm. So in this context, I think it might be worth emphasizing that pronunciation is important in terms of correct Sanskrit pronunciation within the context of japa. Would that be your perspective?
Yes and no. I would say both yes and no. Yes, when you're reciting it aloud, then the mantra is not just a mantra, it's a pranayama. Every letter, every akshara that is involved in the mantra, the consonant sound or the vowel sound, it is a unit of time. which is called mora, a unit of time. And based on how much time it takes to utter that particular syllable, that particular consonant, or that particular vowel, that is nothing but an expulsion of prana. Any exhalation, any sound is possible with exhalation. And the exhalation here is chiseled with the mantra, with what is it, made up of. That sound is made up of these letters, and these letters in a particular combination. So it really, really matters. For example, when we are reciting Gayatri mantra, if I am simply writing the mantra, it would be Om Bhuhu Bhuvaha Swaha. But if I'm reciting it out aloud, then with the rules of grammar, it becomes Om Bhur Bhuva Swaha. The three words combine. And then the repetition of it, it's like one continuous exhalation. Those three words become one exhalation. So it really matters. The pronunciation, the enunciation, all of that matters when you're reciting it out aloud. Sometimes when we are non-Sanskrit speakers, not from the same culture, it becomes difficult to exactly replicate the sounds, exactly replicate its formation. In that case, that is why I said no. In that case, understanding at the back of the mind is important. And because eventually japa is more and more subtler practice, it's not so much about enunciating on every single akshara. Eventually, when you are mentally reciting, the vowel sounds become shorter and shorter. Generally, the repetition of one Gayatri mantra takes about 12 to 16 seconds when you're reciting it out loud. But when you make it manasik japa, there is actually 9 levels in which this mantra becomes subtle. One is 1/2. The amount of time that you take to recite a vowel sound becomes half when you're reciting it mentally. Then you slowly work on reducing that sound 1/2 to 1/4 to 1/8 to 1/16 and 1/32 and so on and so forth. At 9 levels, the same mantra, which was now taking 16 seconds, takes about 2 seconds. So here, the value of exact pronunciation is not there. Understanding is important, but it's not that your vocal apparatus has to exactly mimic.
I think intention is everything, though. An intent to recite correctly, to appreciate the language. I mean, that might just be a personal opinion, certainly. But when it comes to, yes, as you said, the verbal recitation, there's something even just beautiful and nourishing about the articulation of Sanskrit, I find, anyway, personally. But I also appreciate there is, if there is a really deep, sincere intention and devotion as well, that has tremendous value at the same time, because sometimes with the correctness, we can just overly sort of intellectualize our experience. I don't know how that resonates with you.
Absolutely. Yes, you said it very correctly. Intention matters, but intention along with the understanding and appreciation of that there is more. Sometimes there is intention because it's a lot of work. Sometimes we just put intention instead of putting the amount of work that is needed to understand. Right. That is complex. That which is complex does not necessarily need to be simplified. We need to reach that level of subtlety to understand that complexity. That complexity does not need to be made simple and available all the time. There is a reason Yoga Sutras are written in the form of sutras. It's not a book. It is condensed aphorisms that need to be understood not merely by reading a commentary. That cannot be understood merely by reading translation. They have to be contemplated upon. So I do want to highlight that when it comes to mantra, when it comes to understanding of it, it's really important to do the work that is needed. It's not important to fixate or to limit yourself or let something limit yourself, that until and unless I perfect the articulation, I will not be able to do it right. So that fixation needs to be released. But the work that needs to be put, because there are layers and layers and layers of subtlety when we talk about yoga, when we talk about mind, when we talk about ancient text, when we talk about Sanskrit, when we talk about mantra. And appreciation of those layers come when we sincerely put the effort to understand. But I totally agree with you that eventually the intention really matters. A person simply reading the word over and over and over again without the presence of mind may not necessarily reach where it could reach if you also understand what is it that you are doing. Asana can simply become an exercise if you're not differentiating what is exercise versus what is asana.
That's a great analogy. I think about it, when we are in school and we are studying a subject that we don't like and we're just reading the text and reciting it with no presence, no depth, no intention, no care to remember or connect anything. And then there's certain subjects at school that we just loved and could just immerse in and absorb. And I sort of think of it as a bit of that background presence and intention that is there, even in a simple, if you can call it that, a simple practice such as japa or recitation of mantra. So, but I would really love to go deeper with you into the mala etiquette. You've mentioned some different types of mala to be using, whether you're obtaining it or being given it. I think personally, I really believe it's important to emphasize a few things in terms of how to wear our mala that we're using for japa practice, how to appropriately wear it, respectfully wear it, traditionally wear it. In a big picture perspective, one thing I love about Indian culture, and I guess it's probably part of the broader South Asian culture as well, is there's a lot of meaning behind adornments and the wearing of jewelry and things like that the Western world is quite oblivious to. And then that really applies also to wearing mala specifically, a lot of considerations to that which we use for this particular practice. So would you love to expand on that a little bit? That would be wonderful.
Whatever little bit I know, I'm very happy to share. So the word mala by itself simply means a garland. It simply means something that could be used for adorning yourself or your loved one or a deity, for sacredness, or a sculpture. Mala simply means a garland that could be made up of flowers, a garland that could be made up of different materials. As I shared, it could be made up of seeds to woods to crystals, sometimes even bones. There are different kinds of malas. When we say japa mala, it means a mala that is specifically utilized for practicing the japa of a mantra. And such a mala in Indian tradition for mantras, Vedic mantras, Upanishadic mantras, is made up of 108 beads. And the 109th bead that holds everything together along with a tassel. Now, this mala is different than the rest of the malas. When I say the rest of the malas apart from japa mala could be Saundarya mala. Saundarya means beauty, something that you just wear for aesthetic purposes because it's pleasing to the mind. It just goes well with your dress, whatever goes with the vibe, whatever the state of your mind is. Then there is the chikitsa malas, which are suggested either by a jyotisha, by an astrology chart reader, or by an Ayurveda acharya, by a Vaidya, based on your dosha, to balance the doshas, to work on the planetary action. Then there are malas which are called Sanketa malas. Sanketa means symbolic. And these could, like, I know this is not a video interview, but I want to tell the listeners, I'm wearing a mala. It's made up of one bead, which is pearl, and one bead, which is Rudrani. And this is a mala that was worn by my mother most of her life. And once she passed on, this was the one piece of her that I just wanted to have around me. This is Sanketa mala because there is an emotion, there is a symbology associated with it, there is a connection that is beyond aesthetics. So there could be those malas too. And then there are malas that are designed based on certain sutras, certain philosophies, certain mantras to honor them, to make one think about. So there are different kinds of malas, is what I'm trying to iterate. Then the Japa mala, the etiquette of Japa mala is when you're using it for japa, that you do not let the lower part of the mala touch the floor. You can keep the other hand to support the mala, or you can let the mala dangle in your lap. Sometimes there is also a kind of pouch in Vaishnava tradition, which is called Gaumukhi, in which the mala is kept inside because the mantra recitation is considered a kind of sadhana, personal practice, which means it should not be seen by others. It is just something sacred, and it is just something personal. It's something very intimate. So it is not something that is visible to others. So it is also a pouch hanging by your wrist with the mala inside it. That is one of the etiquettes of the mala, that not touching the ground, could be resting in the lap, resting on the other hand, resting in a gaumukhi. This is important. This is all as a sign of respect. But the other thing is, as you're holding the bead and rolling the bead between the fingers and the thumb, you're also infusing it with the mantric vibrations, with the sonic impression of the mantra. So each mantra becomes like a seed. Each mantra becomes a carrier of that mantric vibrations. And you don't want those mantric vibrations to be earthed down. You want it to be circulating within your own body. So that is one of the aspects of Japamala. Second, after you complete the japa, generally the mala is kept inside, either if it has a bag, inside the bag, or it is kept at an altar if you're doing a mantra which is associated to or devoted to, dedicated to a specific Ishta Devta, your personal deity, or the mantra is dedicated to a personal Devi Devta, then you're adorning the Devi Devta with that mala or keeping it at the altar. However, sometimes I see people, wearing mala around the wrist or around the neck. Generally, if it is a jap mala, you can wear it around the neck. Generally not suggested to wear it around the wrist. And the reason again is that it is not a piece of jewelry. It's not something for show off. It's actually something intimate. Even if you're wearing it around the neck, it should be under the clothes. It should not be something that you wear over the clothes. The other important aspect of japamala is that tassel. That tassel is not a pendant. That tassel is not a charm. That is not to be hanging in the front. That is to be kept at the nape of the neck, again hidden. And that is seen connected, that is representative of the connection of that guru bead, the guru bead, that is that 109th bead, to the guru chakra, which is a part of the crown chakra. There is 100-petaled lotus inside the 1,000-petaled lotus, which is called the guru chakra. And that guru energy, guru tattva, is supposed to be that guiding light of the mantra towards consciousness. So you wear it at the nape of the neck, symbolic of its connection to the crown. And also at the nape of the neck, there is a marma. Marma means secret. And marma also are certain points or regions which are secretive pools of energy, of pranic energy in our body, connecting the subtle body with the physical body. So you can think of it as bridge points. So the 109th bead and the tassel rests there at the nape of the neck, where there is a marma, there is a secretive pranic point directly connected to subconscious mind. So when you wear it around the neck, it is almost all the energy that is in the 108th bead, 108 beads goes into the 109th bead. And from the 109th bead into this marma that is at the nape of the neck. And from there, it is a transfer to your subconscious mind. Also, the tassel represents our nadi system. So the thread of the mala is representative of the subtle body. The beads of the mala represent our physical body. The knot between the two threads represent the connection between the two breaths or the two mantras. So mala is a very symbolic piece of prop or tool that is utilized for the sake of mind, for the sake of calming the mind or guiding the mind. So that tassel, which represents the 72,000 nadis, again, you don't wear it in the front because you don't want all that energy to leak out. You want that energy to be kept close to you, secretive, and that prana to be transferred to your subconscious mind. These are some of the things that come to mind when it comes to mala. Generally, when we use a japa mala, we use the right hand for the japa. But it may not be possible for everyone to be able to use a right hand. In that case, you can utilize the left hand for the practice. It's not that that is not possible at all. But when you hold the mala, generally the mala is held in a japa mudra. And what I would do, it's difficult to articulate that, and make it clear to the listener. So what I might do, Amy, is suggest a link that can be posted along with the podcast episode, and that can point the listeners towards an image and its explanation of what is a japa mudra.
Mm-hmm. That sounds great. Yeah, and I think it's important to note at the very least that we don't use the index finger.
Absolutely. The index finger is the antenna. That is what connects the mind to the guru tattva. And that in older times, the radios used to have this antennas, and the antennas needed to be pulled off to connect. In the same way, in our hand, in the japa mudra, the index finger represents that antenna to connect with the guru tattva.
I love it. It's so interesting. I think it's all incredible. The symbolism and the subtle understanding of everything. It's so rich. It just brings so much depth to what some may experience as a mechanical practice. And you are evidently a wealth of knowledge, and I would love to ask you, before we close up today, a couple of other questions briefly. You have published 3 books, so you're sharing your insight through these 3 books. So Mudra, The Sacred Secret, Yoga, Ancient Heritage, Tomorrow's Vision, and also a book called SOMA, 100 Heritage Recipes for Self-Care. I'd love you to briefly touch on the inspiration and motivation behind each of these books, if you will.
Mudra was my first step into yoga. At the age of 16, when I met my first teacher, I was initiated in the practice of mudras. So that was my starting point of yoga. It's a subject that, therefore, I'm very invested in, very dedicated about, and always curious about. And that is what led to the compilation of this book, Mudra, The Sacred Secret, which is dedicated to just hand mudras. There is so many different kinds of mudras in yoga. For example, the body mudra, which is Viparita Karni, commonly misunderstood as legs up the wall pose. It is not an asana. It's not just legs up the wall. It's actually a mudra. Or mudras in pranayama, for example, the Mula Bandha, Udyana Bandha, these are all mudras. But this book is dedicated to more than 150 hand mudras, primarily focused on therapeutic hand mudras. But there is also a chapter dedicated to general mudras. And at the end, there is 32 mudras of Gayatri Mantra. And then there is Nyasa mudras for those who are ready to take it one step deeper into the practice of mudras. Yoga book, that was the first book that I wrote. That was written at the time when I was moving from India to United States. So I was around 25, 26 at that time, and I used to be leading classes in India, about 9 classes every day, 1 hour each, 5 days a week. And I did that for 5 years in India. So those group of participants, they were to some extent disheartened that I'm leaving India and moving to United States. And they pushed me that, can you please write something for us? And what I actually wanted to do was, and I did was, guide, audio practice sessions of 1 hour each. And I wanted to write, how along with it, there is a leaflet that explains. I wanted to write a leaflet that explains about the audio practices. And at that time, I remember 26, 27, I closed myself in my room. And I remember my mother used to knock the door to give me the food sometimes. And I was not using computer. I was writing everything with hand. My hand used to get so tired. My sister used to come and help. And I would just say, and she would write things. Anyways, by the end of 30 days, we had a 430-page something. And the person who was actually helping me in this whole process, at the end of that month, knocked the door and said, "What are you doing? You need to stop writing." So that became the first book, Yoga, Ancient Heritage, Tomorrow's Vision. But it was written in such a short time. There were so many editorial mistakes. I was too young. So a re-edited version, in fact, an extended version of it was published in 2019, Yoga, Ancient Heritage, Tomorrow's Vision. And that is a book where it's written in mind, based on my personal experience and what I've learned from my teachers and from the texts. Yoga in the context of Ayurveda, yoga in the context of Hatha Yoga, Raja Yoga, yoga in the context of Tantra. So it combines a lot of different principles together. And then the SOMA 100 Heritage Recipes for Self-Care is an homage to living in joint family and learning all these recipes and cues and tricks from my grandmother, from my uncle, from my father, from my mother, from my teachers, from my, just anyone who has touched my life so far. What are some of the things, yogic practices, Ayurvedic recipes, mantras, mudras? What are some of the things that have really touched my life? And these are not necessarily the things you can Google about or you can find in books, because most of them are oral tradition. So these were the recipes I was sharing in a lot of trainings and classes and workshops. And once again, the participants, can you write them down in a book? And that's what gave birth to SOMA 100 Heritage Recipes for Self-Care.
Incredible resources for the community. So wherever anybody is based, that you've popped all your knowledge and insight in there. Well, not all of it, but plenty of it to assimilate. And obviously they are tools for serious seekers, practitioners, teachers, those doing teacher training. Really, really important that you've put this work into the world. And you've touched on this very briefly, but you were born and spent your childhood in India. There's a timeline of your life, sort of the highlights of your life, let's say, on your website. But you've also spent a lot of time in the West, and you've recently celebrated 25 years of Yoga Sadhana, which was established in 1999, which is incredible. Is there anything you'd like to share about your story and your path to get to this point, and everything that you're doing and the way that you're serving the community?
There's so much when one, looks back and reflects upon what are the turning points, what are the things that really changed the course of my life. Since today we talked about mantra, I'll share some of those incidents, how mantra became a force in my life. At the age of 16, when I met my first teacher who initiated me into Mudra, at that age, I was too young to understand the power of it, but my teacher told me to contemplate upon the phrase, who am I? Koham. And I was suggested to write it on a piece of paper, print it out, and put it in front of my bed. So every time before I go to bed or upon waking up, I would look at it. Now, for 16-year-old Indu, it was like, who am I? I'm Indu. I know who I am. Like, what is this all about? But that the seed was planted. Maybe I did not understand the gravity, the intensity, the scope of it, but the seed definitely was planted. And whether I took it lightly or could not understand all of it, I was sincere. So I would think about it every day. Who am I? I would just repeat it, which is also one of the ways for mantras. Mantras also are sometimes phrases where you don't do the repetition 108 times, but you contemplate, you practice self-inquiry. That was my starting point, I would say, into practices of yoga. And then later on, the same teacher gave me a mantra. You remember I was talking about matchsticks, moving matchsticks from one side to another, listeners? So that was the same person, same teacher who gave me a mantra. And I was suggested to wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning to do the mantra. Very young, 17 at that time. But again, even if I did not understand the gravity of it, there was I'm so thankful that I had that sincerity beyond logic, beyond my limited mind. I had that sense of surrender, thanks to my parents, thanks to the upbringing, maybe thanks to some karmas in the past, thanks to the grace of the gurus. But that sincerity was there. I remember waking up at 2 or 3 a.m. and doing my japa, using a jap mala over and over and over again every day at 2 to 3 a.m. That was again something that was that was a turning point in my life. Doing that added that value of sincerity, tapasya, practice, a structure, such a beautiful time when I look back. And then when I met my teacher, whom I got to stay with, and at the age of 20, I stayed with her. And that's where I think I learned majority of my, what I call yoga practices or kriyas. And the first question my teacher asked after sharing something about Gayatri Mantra is, do you have any questions? And at that time, again, 2021, I didn't even know how to ask questions. But she infused that idea that asking questions is very important. That also came through the discussion around a mantra. And then another teacher of mine, who is my Diksha Guru, who gave me the mantra for the japa, one thing that I learned from him was this phrase, idam namama, which means this is not mine. And that is something that guides my life, that this knowledge is a debt. It is not mine. Any good karmas that I do, it is not mine. That any act, even if I move my body in an asana, that experience of pleasantness, just continuous vairagya, continuous detachment, this is not mine. That's something that guides my life. These things have become things that have blossomed at different times, all related to mantras and mahavakyas that have guided my life. I really, really hope that the listeners are develop curiosity into japa yoga, into mantra yoga, explore. There is so much more about mantra that we could cover in this time, but there is so much more. I mean, we could make a series out of it, Amy. That is how much content is there in this subject. I just hope that you're inspired to go deeper.
So with that in mind, where would be the best place for the listener to find and connect with you? Website, social media?
Yes, website is always a permanent, digital address. You can look for induarora.com or yogasadhana.com, the name given by my teacher, Yoga Sadhana. And Instagram, Indu Arora Official. These are the 2 places you can find me. And I'm happy if our paths would cross, and if I can continue paying off the debt of my teachers by sharing the limited I know.
Mm-hmm. And you have many online courses that you offer and do mentoring and so forth. What do you have? What's in the pipeline over the coming months for the rest of this year?
Well, there is I know this podcast is primarily based in Australia. There is an in-person Ayurveda program coming up in Colorado, Applied Ayurveda. But the next year, in 2025, we are looking into a lot of online trainings, which people can join from all over the world. There would be Yoga Nidra training, there would be Pranayama training, Essential Ayurveda. There would be short courses like Yoga and Ayurveda for menopause. There would be short courses on self-care series, even study of texts like Sankhya Darshan or Devi Mahatmyam. So a lot of things to look forward to. Keep an eye on the website. Subscribe to the newsletter. That is how you will come to know through website, through newsletter, when the dates would be posted. Yes, right now there is option to sign up for mentoring, which is a remote mentoring option. You can read the details on the website. There are very few people that I, pick up every year to lead through that. So if that is something you're interested about, a specific subject, look up the details online.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And your humbleness, your reverence, your generosity is so inspiring and admirable. Thank you for your continued work that you're doing within the global community. It's very treasured, and I'm so grateful for your time today. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you, Amy.
If this episode was of value to you and your life, please subscribe. And if you can think of someone who would benefit from this dialogue, please do them a favor and send it their way. If you feel called, hop on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review. This is the best way to get these conversations into the ears and hearts of our wider community, to those who need it most. You can find me at amyelandry.com or over on Instagram at amyelandry. May we all move a little closer to a life living in alignment.